Hello. So this is a little bonus video I made for completion's sake of going through the training room in the deleted scenes. It's pretty similar to the training room in the original Half-Life, only without the excitement. So to keep things interesting, while we do this, I'll be going through the development of Counter-Strike Condition Zero. It's an interesting, if almost Greek tragedy tale. In this case, I think it's best to start it at the end. What's particularly notable about Condition Zero is that it was a Gold Source game released in 2004. Nothing against Gold Source, mind you. I love it. It's probably my favorite engine of all time. But this was 2004, March or April, I believe, which puts it at just about 6 months, maybe 7 or 8 if you're being generous, for the release of Half-Life 2 and Counter-Strike Source. And if you just compare the tech, graphics, physics, sound, water reflections, all that fancy stuff, I mean, they're in an entirely different league, which makes Condition Zero look very dated indeed. Remember that Gold Source first appeared in 1997 and 1998, a full 6 years before, and it itself was a modified version of the engine from the original Quake. So, it's some pretty dated tech. So, how did all this happen? Well, back in just about 2000, when Counter-Strike was still a very young mod, well before the release of 1.5 and 1.6, I think even before 1.3, Valve decided they wanted to make a single-player version of Counter-Strike, which makes sense, right? I mean, we've only just come out of the 90s, and the tech was still developing. Most people were still on dial-up connections and broadband ISDN. If you were getting a megabyte or megabit a second, then you were living in the future. So single player seems like a no-brainer, right? So Valve contacted a developer by the name of Rogue Entertainment to see about doing a single-player Counter-Strike project. Things seemed to be going well. They were getting into the early phases, pre-production, concept art, all that jazz, when disaster struck. The lead producer, I believe, decided to jump ship and head for, I think it was Sony or Sony Online Entertainment. Now, Valve had gotten a bit sloppy, and they hadn't had Rogue sign NDAs yet, which means that this guy was leaving. He knew all about the Counter-Strike project, and he had no obligation to keep silent about it. So Valve, exercising a little risk aversion, decided to wash their hands of the whole thing, dumped Rogue from the project, and instead gave it to Gearbox Entertainment, who would do Blue Shift and Opposing Force, the 2 expansion packs for Half-Life, along with, well, now they're best known for Aliens Colonial Marines, but I digress. So they gave the game project to Gearbox, and that's where a whole lot of the work was done. We got to see clear vision, and the game really started to come together, as we can see in a number of trailers where Randy Pitchford was doing his usual 800-pound gorilla. So things were going pretty well, or, well, they were making progress. I'm not sure I can agree with a lot of the development decisions. For example, there are plans to add the tactical shield, which we would actually eventually see, along with a rocket launcher, M72A2 Law, for those of you familiar, along with some other questionable decisions, such as machine guns firing full-size rifle ammo. You'll actually see one of them in the first episode, and a number of other small things like tear gas and the like. So things were going well enough until Gearbox, for whatever reason, decided to drop the project. It doesn't seem that they had anything against Counter-Strike per se, as they would go on to later release the Xbox port of it, but they just didn't like Condition Zero. Maybe they knew something we didn't. But seeing what would eventually become of the game, it might have been a prudent choice. Regardless, there was still a game that was half finished, and Valve needed someone to finish it. For some reason, they were too busy to do much of the work themselves, so they passed it on to a developer by the name of Ritual Entertainment. Don't confuse them in a row. So, Ritual picked up where Gearbox left off, cleaned up a lot of their work, and got things into just about a releasable state. So they had minted copies, they were ready to go gold, and shipped the game when, once again, disaster. This time, the disaster was that, well, it wasn't a very good game. Simply put, the review scores were coming back, and they were bad, about 60%. Now, if you're familiar with video game reviews, you should know that the scores are significantly inflated. You can probably bring them down a good 20 or 30% to get scores comparable to other media, music, movies, literature, etc. So a 60% score is bad, very bad. Now, Valve is a very well-known, respected developer. I dare say that since Nintendo abandoned their official seal of approval, that Valve was probably about the closest thing to a gold seal of quality. And I mean, it's evident. Half-Life, Team Fortress, Day of Defeat, Portal, I could go on. They've done a lot of good stuff. So, to release a game that bad would significantly tarnish their reputation. So, once again, they passed the project off to another developer. This time, it went to the quite new, very young Turtle Rock Studios. Now, that name may sound familiar, whereas Rogue Entertainment and Ritual both went defunct shortly afterwards. Turtle Rock is perhaps best known for its work on Left 4 Dead and later on Evolve, two very big-name AAA games, which sold quite a few copies. So, Turtle Rock's probably the only one that came out of this ahead. So, what Turtle Rock did was, well, I'm getting ahead of myself. At this point, we've gone through about 3 developers in the span of 3 coming on 4 years. So Turtle Rock was on a clock here. They had to get results and get it quickly. What they elected to do was, instead of going with a full-on ambitious single-player project, I dare say even a sort of proto Call of Duty, because that was... You'll notice, as you watch the LP, there are a whole lot of parallels in the theme, appearance, aesthetics, that sort of thing, between Condition Zero, deleted scenes, and the later on Call of Duties, the Modern Warfare series, and the like. So, rather than do something in a similar vein, seeing as how it had turned out for all the other developers, and hurting for time, Turtle Rock instead decided to leverage the bot AI that Gearbox had started and they'd finished. So, since this was of course meant to be a single-player project, and a big part of the selling point were those that didn't have internet, or internet good enough to play online, they'd made some pretty good AI. And if I can digress a little bit, it's probably the second best AI I've ever seen in a video game, only second to Stalker, if you played it. It's very, very good, and the fact that it hasn't really been surpassed in the time since says a lot about the state of video games as they are now, for better or worse. I would say for worse. Regardless, they leveraged the AI and decided to use it in a single player, which really, I wouldn't... It's technically single player, but I wouldn't call it single player in any meaningful sense. It was effectively a multiplayer match with bots. So, you got a team of bots on your side and a team of bots on the enemy side. So you and your team of bots have to beat the enemy team of bots. But to keep things interesting, they added a few challenges. This is rather generic fare: kill an enemy with a grenade, get 3 kills with the TMP and survive the round, 4 kills with scout headshots, defuse a bomb and survive the round, that sort of thing. Nothing particularly earth-shattering, but what is cool about it is that they provided a simple framework so that you could add missions of your own. They're all still in the standard Counter-Strike vein of rounds and bomb planting, defusal, or rescuing hostages, but it is a neat touch. So that's the single player, but you can't really sell a game on nothing more than the inclusion of bots. That's a pretty tiny addition. So they took as many of the art assets as they could from what had already been made in what would become the deleted scenes, Ritual and Gearbox's work, and combined it with a number of assets that they made themselves to create what was effectively an HD pack for Counter-Strike. So they remodeled and retextured the weapons, gave them new sounds, and they gave a visual overhaul for all of the levels. Also did some slight changes to the design, but nothing major for any of the maps. And then they even adapted a couple of the maps in the deleted scenes to become multiplayer maps as well. Add a bit of content there. But it still can't hide the fact that the entire game was very content sparse. It released with almost nothing to speak of, and the only thing that really makes it stand out is the AI, which once again is stellar. And I'll often play it single player against a few bots for fun here and there. But in the end, Turtle Rock couldn't save this train wreck, and it ended up getting review scores of Metacritic has it listed as an average of 65%, only a 5% increase. Now, make no mistake, it is still Counter-Strike, but it's not the revolution that we were promised. And it's certainly not worth paying for Counter-Strike a second time.